I have written another article for Beijing Review. This one is titled War on Multipolarism Includes Latin America. This was published November 13th, 2025. I actually wrote it quite a bit earlier, and it took a while to get published. But as you will see, as I read through this, this is a solid foundation to understand what is happening in Venezuela, how it fits into the larger geopolitical picture, and then based on recent developments, which I will go over toward the end of this video, you will see how this has very predictably developed. This is another U.S. war of aggression built on a false pretext to sell it to the American people, to manufacture consent for yet another war of aggression abroad. And it fits into a larger pattern of America pursuing global primacy. People see the location of Venezuela in the Western Hemisphere, and I have no idea why, but they just conclude that, see, this is the United States withdrawing from the world, building up its own sphere of influence. It's retreating from global primacy, and it's in the process of transitioning into a nation that accepts its place in multipolarism. And it's simply not true. If you are pursuing global primacy, Venezuela is located on the globe, the same globe the US is pursuing primacy everywhere else. If you think about the entire globe as a game board, and you are trying to encircle and contain Russia and China, Venezuela is an ally of both of these nations by taking over Venezuela, by collapsing the government, by undermining it, encircling, containing it, collapsing its economy, turning its people against one another. You are further isolating both Russia and China. You are contributing to the pursuit of global primacy by attacking this country, undermining this country closer to your own borders, yes, but still a nation that fits into everything that is going on internationally. I don't understand why this is so hard for people to understand. I will read this article. I'm talking about mainly certain analysts out there who have repeatedly cited the US focusing on Venezuela, or ambiguous news articles in, say, Politico claiming the US is retreating. They say, aha, this is proof of my theory that the US, President Donald Trump, is saving us all. He's pivoting America away from decades of pursuing American primacy worldwide. He's going to accommodate Russia and especially China, and everything is changing for the better. No, it's not. This is a symptom of everything continuing the exact same direction, actually accelerating dangerously. Let me read through the article, and as always, I will add additional information when and if necessary. I will show you all of the links that I referenced in this article. The link to the article will be in the video description below, so will all of the links that I referenced in the article. Let me begin. As the US continues its proxy war with Russia in Ukraine, and its escalation with China in the Asia Pacific, all of this continues. It's actually escalating. So again, that is reality. People who want to lock in and focus on Venezuela as proof that the US is withdrawing from the rest of the world, that is fantasy. The US is also targeting a number of nations across Eurasia, but also far beyond it, including Latin America and the nation of Venezuela in particular. The purpose of targeting Venezuela officially is to stop the flood of illicit narcotics into the US. Venezuela's government is accused of facilitating. In reality, this is a fabricated pretext meant to manufacture consent for yet another war of aggression, one designed to contribute to a wider geopolitical objective of confronting and rolling back multipolarism. This is part of a war on multipolarism, a global war on multipolarism. Again, Venezuela is located on the globe, so it is going to be caught up in the global war the US is waging against multipolarism. The US, since the end of the Cold War, has pursued a US-dominated unipolar world order where all matters are determined by and for the US. And when I say the US, I don't mean the American people. There's over 300 million American people. The pursuit of global primacy by the US is not to benefit the American people. The American people are among the many victims of US unipolar hegemony, targets, and harms with its policies. I'm talking about a small handful of corporate financier interests, the largest corporations and financial institutions based in the United States, huge corporations, the ones you see listed on Wall Street, whose primary shareholders are equity firms like BlackRock and Vanguard. And before that, there was Carlyle Group. That was an equity firm lined with members of the Bush Senior administration, if you remember that far back. These are the interests that all of these policies are meant to serve at the expense of absolutely everyone else, including the American public. And how do we know this? Because it has been covered in the media and admitted openly for many, many years. This is the New York Times. This is from all the way back 1992. And if you read this, U.S. strategy plan calls for ensuring no rivals develop. It sounds like it could have been written yesterday. It could have been said at the podium of some Trump administration event. All of this about containing all of these other nations. All other nations need to answer to the U.S. It sounds like it could have been written yesterday. I've covered this many, many times. If you have not read this article, please, the link will be in the video description below. Please read it. In recent years, this has focused on preventing the reemergence of Russia and the rise of China. You have to remember, back in 1992, the Soviet Union collapsed. The emerging Russian Federation was in complete disarray, and China was still an impoverished country struggling to develop. Back then, all of this seemed much more plausible and likely to succeed. Now we see Russia reemerging. We see China on the rise, surpassing not just the US, but the collective West altogether. We see it surpassing them in so many different ways. The US understands that the window of opportunity to achieve global primacy, to reassert itself and its unipolar world order, that window of opportunity is closing, and they need to act fast to reassert themselves. This is what we are watching. This is why we see all of these wars escalating, dangerous escalations that we never even saw during the Cold War, the height of the Cold War, and conflicts like what we see being prepared against Venezuela, being sold half-heartedly. They don't even care if really anybody buys into it or not. They're going to do this. They're trying to sell it to as many people as possible who will buy it, but they're going to do it regardless. They don't care. It's just like putting Al-Qaeda in charge of Syria, inviting al-Jawani, who had a $10 million bounty on his head not even a year ago, being invited to the White House, and President Donald Trump, who said he was fighting ISIS and Al-Qaeda, smiling ear to ear, side by side with the head of Al-Qaeda in Syria right now, who is right now butchering Muslims who are not part of his fake extremist sect built up by the U.S. through its regional proxies like Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Turkey. They're killing just ordinary Muslims, Sunni and Shia alike, Alawites. They're also killing Druze. They're also killing Christians. So President Trump, the big protector of Christianity, is sitting there side by side with a man whose troops are slaughtering, sawing the heads off of Christians all across Syria. So that is the reality. Whether you like it or not, that is the reality. That is what the U.S. is doing, and they don't care. They're out of time. They're rushing, and they don't care what it looks like. They want to achieve this regardless of the cost in doing so. So in recent years, this has focused on preventing the reemergence of Russia and the rise of China. It has also focused on preventing nations outside U.S. dominion from allying with either or both. The U.S. achieves this through influence, coercion, political capture, and failing that, proxy war, then actual war. And those are all of the steps that we have just watched the United States over this entire 21st century go through in order to try to capture and control Venezuela. They attempted it through influence, coercion, and political capture. There was an attempt to overthrow the Venezuelan government under Bush Jr.'s administration, if you remember that. And then if that fails, we will watch a proxy war or an actual war be prepared and then launched against this targeted nation. This is what they did to Syria. This is what they did to Libya. This is what they have done to so many countries around the globe. So under a section titled Continuity of Agenda from Bush to Obama to now Trump, and again, it spans both of his administrations because this is now his second time in office, he has done his part in continuity with everyone before and after him. Venezuela has been targeted by the U.S. for regime change throughout the entire 21st century. The Bush administration very briefly ousted the government of Venezuelan President Hugo Chavez in 2002. Since then, regardless of who occupies the White House or controls U.S. Congress, U.S.-funded political interference, sanctions, and covert military operations have continued, placing pressure on Venezuela in hopes of removing the current political order from power and replacing it with a U.S. client regime. This was just last month, October 2025. NED congratulates Maria Corina Machado on receiving the Nobel Peace Prize. The Nobel Peace Prize that President Trump so desperately desires, when in reality it is a deep state seal of approval. So why does he want it so desperately? And it's used to do exactly this: take these illegitimate proxies, puppets of American power globally, build up the illusion of their legitimacy so that when they install them into power, people say, oh, she won the Nobel Peace Prize. How wonderful. What a bright future Venezuela has. They did the exact same thing with Aung San Suu Kyi here in Southeast Asia, and the destitute, endlessly warring nation of Myanmar, right next to Thailand. Just decades and decades of fighting because the U.S. is backing militants and political opposition groups it wants to install into power over the current ruling government and military. While headlines focus on U.S. President Donald Trump's obsession with regime change in Venezuela spanning his 2 terms in office, it should be noted that sanctions and political interference targeting the nation continued from the Bush administration, under 8 years of Obama, and throughout the previous Biden administration. So I am not just picking on President Donald Trump. President Obama for 8 years and President Biden for 4 years also contributed to this singular agenda that continues no matter who you vote for. And we know that because we have right on the Obama White House archives, the official White House Obama archives. Fact sheet, Venezuela executive order. If you read through this, it's all about crippling Venezuela economically, undermining the government, and prompting political change, and by that they mean regime change. So that was under President Obama. And then Biden reinstates sanctions on Venezuela, April 2024. So that was right before President Trump took office. So this has been a work in progress. Each president puts their own spin on why they have to do this, but it is a singular agenda that ties all the way back to this singular U.S. policy of ensuring no rivals develop, and no nation on earth is able to work together with those rivals because the U.S. will undermine them, overthrow them, destroy their country, or politically capture it, which is why the U.S. is targeting Venezuela. It has nothing to do with a sphere of influence or the U.S. retreating from its pursuit of global primacy. It was, however, under the first Trump administration that covert military operations attempted to topple the Venezuelan government by force in 2020, taking place at a time when the U.S. officially recognized opposition figure Juan Guaido as president of Venezuela, despite not even having run in elections. And we remember this huge push by the U.S. and getting all of its proxies around the globe to recognize Juan Guaido as the president of Venezuela. And they went on with this charade for a very long time, an embarrassingly long time, but it never took root. They were never able to oust the Venezuelan government and get this puppet regime into power. And I remember videos of Juan Guaido running around Caracas. He had like his own presidential podium, and he would put it down. It was almost like a comedy skit, and he would put it down and he would do a speech, and then he would pick it up, and all of his supporters, they would all run away before the police came. This is what the U.S. is doing all around the globe. This is what they're actually doing versus what people imagine the U.S. is doing. Now, we know about these covert military operations right here. Trump denies role in bungled incursion, but an incursion like this requires a state sponsor. And who do you think was sponsoring all of these Americans with military backgrounds and military equipment? Who do you think was behind that? And so there's this covert military operation. Let me continue reading the article. Despite attempts by the Trump administration to deny involvement in the 2020 failed overthrow of the Venezuelan government, which he is now following up with this very overt attempt to overthrow the Venezuelan government. So really, in retrospect, it was obvious that the U.S. was behind that previous attempt. It fits in with both a historical pattern of U.S. interference worldwide and other covert operations carried out under the Trump administration, including a deadly 2019 incursion into North Korea, revealed only earlier this year by the New York Times. You remember this? How a top secret SEAL Team 6 mission into North Korea fell apart. And what happened was President Trump, the US, was posing as wanting peace with North Korea and wanting to work together with them. And as they were setting up the meeting to talk about this bright future together, the US sent in a covert military operation to set up equipment to spy on the North Korean government, to intercept their communications. And when fishermen, just ordinary civilian fishermen, were going past where this operation was unfolding, the Navy SEALs murdered them all, stabbed their bodies, stabbed their lungs so that their body would sink into the ocean, trying to cover up the evidence. So that's how the US actually operates. That's how the US does business. And again, that happened under President Trump, but it happens under every single administration. No matter who you vote for, this is what you're voting for, because again, all of this always ultimately goes back to serving this one singular, uninterrupted agenda. This is why this is what I'm referring to when I say continuity of agenda. Regardless, the US now openly seeks to overthrow the Venezuelan government and has been assembling significant military forces to do so off Venezuela's coasts, including US Navy and Marine Corps vessels, warplanes, and troops. Should the decision be made to launch a military operation, it will likely take the form of similar decapitation strikes the US and its Israeli proxies have conducted against Hezbollah in Lebanon last year, and again that was under the Biden administration, and against the Iranian government earlier this year under the Trump administration, together with strikes aimed at crippling civilian infrastructure and damaging Venezuela's economy, whatever is left of its economy after, again, decades of the US undermining and trying to destroy it, even further than years of US sanctions already have. Now, I listen to Alex and Alexander, the Duran, very frequently, almost daily, and they were talking about whether or not the US is building up this military force to basically do a psychological operation to try to create the conditions under which elements within Venezuela's government and society will rise up and overthrow the government because of this building threat of a US military operation, or whether this is actually built up to an actual military operation. And of course, Alex and Alexander very correctly concluded that they're not going to try to compel the Venezuelan government to collapse, and then if it doesn't work, just bring all of their military assets home. That probably isn't going to happen. And so what they're actually doing is working along a spectrum. And it begins with sanctions, covert operations. You're trying to undermine the Venezuelan government, cripple the economy as badly as possible. You're trying to get people into the streets. You're trying to get the opposition that you have built up and that you fund and control and direct. You're trying to create an opportunity for them to overthrow the government, basically through a US engineered color revolution. And then you're building up your military force to try to scare people who are actually loyal or have been loyal to the current Venezuelan government to switch sides and essentially conduct a coup against the sitting Venezuelan government. And then if that does not work, then they will go with military operations. They will go with standoff strikes on Venezuelan military sites, economic and civilian infrastructure, and they will continue carrying out these strikes and these attempts to just kill the senior leadership of the Venezuelan government and military until nobody is left and everything just collapses, or they can get their proxies into power. So it is a spectrum they're working along. It's not either or. It is all of these options, and they're working their way across them, just like they did with Russia in this Rand Corporation paper extending Russia. They have table of contents, and they have all of these economic and geopolitical measures. It wasn't this one or this one or this one. Well, maybe we'll do this one or this one. They did all of them, and they did them in a logical order, and they continue doing it. And then you have this paper from 2009, Which Path to Persia? It wasn't, we'll do this option or that option. They worked their way through all of these options: persuasion, sanctions, attempting to round the engagement option, which was just bait and switch. That was the Obama nuclear deal that the U.S. itself sabotaged and then blamed Iran for. And then they talk about military options and invasion, airstrikes, which we watched earlier this year, allowing or encouraging Israel to do it, which again happened this year. Both happened. They also talk about color revolution, inspiring an insurgency, and they talk about listed U.S. terrorist organizations that they would back, and also the coup. So just switch Iran with Venezuela. That is exactly what they're doing to Venezuela right now. They're working along this spectrum. They're doing all of these things. They intend to go through all of these options until they succeed or until they fail. But they're going to go through all of these options nonetheless. That is what they are preparing for. While U.S. President Trump campaigned for office on a platform of ending endless wars, did he? Did he do that? I mean, do people remember? At Arlington, Trump returns to the politics of the forever wars. The 2024 presidential race is the first in 24 years without a major American ground war. But Donald J. Trump continues to stoke divisions over the post-9/11 conflicts that helped give rise to his movement. And his whole movement is based on the false promise of ending these wars. He didn't end any war. During his first term in office, he continued every single war that he inherited from the Obama administration, and he set the stage to wage all of these now out of control escalating wars we see continuing under his second term in office and all throughout 4 years of Biden before him. He was the one who started sending weapons to Ukraine. That is almost certainly what prompted Russia to launch its special military operation in 2022. They didn't launch it under the Trump administration because they were still preparing for it. It's a major military operation. You don't do these things overnight, just like the U.S. isn't going to invade Venezuela overnight. They are building up to do it. It takes months. It could take a year or more to carry out these type of operations. And it takes just as much time for Russia to do it as it does the United States, maybe more time, because Russia does not have the ability to project military power around the globe in the same way the United States does. So that was what President Trump promised. Now that he's in office, he has started multiple new wars. He's preparing to start this war with Venezuela. He continues absolutely every war he inherited from the previous Biden administration and his own first term in office and 8 years of Obama before him. So this is where we are right now. He's promised to end these endless wars. Since taking office, he has continued each war inherited from the previous Biden administration while launching and preparing to launch several new conflicts. The United States is bombing countries across northern Africa, all across the Middle East. The U.S. went to war with Iran. That war is only on pause, has not ended. The United States continues its proxy war in Ukraine against Russia, and it continues its military buildup across the Asia-Pacific region to then do the exact same thing to China. To justify a war of aggression against Venezuela aimed at regime change, President Trump has shifted narratives previously based on fighting Venezuela's corruption and dictatorship. Do you remember under the Bush Jr. administration, under Obama, under Biden, they talked about how it's an evil dictatorship and we need to remove it from power. That doesn't work. Americans don't care about that. So they just shifted the narrative to something they thought maybe Americans will buy. Maybe they're ignorant enough or emotional enough to buy it. And so this is where we are right now. So it's been shifted to blaming America's decades-spanning drug crisis suddenly and squarely on Venezuela. When did Americans ever associate Venezuela with the flood of illicit narcotics into the United States? People connect it to Colombia. They connect it to Mexico. They even connect it to the CIA. And when I say Colombia and Mexico, I mean the proxies the CIA is working with to produce the drugs and then move them into the United States and then distribute them through America's communities. I guarantee you that before Venezuela was popularized under this current Trump administration, more Americans, if you were to poll them, if you gave them a list of options, Colombia, Mexico, CIA, Venezuela would be last on the list among who the U.S. Americans associate with the drug crisis in the U.S. But now it's at the top of the list because the TV told them so, and they just believe it. The administration has claimed, all right, this is important to understand, and I pointed this out before. This is the official whitehouse.gov website. under President Donald J. Trump. Promises made, promises kept. Border security achieved in fewer than 100 days. The border is secure. This was all the way back in April. Imagine how secure it must be right now. Must be airtight. The administration has claimed President Trump is acting to protect our country from those trying to bring deadly poison to our shores. At the same time, the Trump administration has also claimed within its first 100 days in office to have already secured America's borders. And people are trying to argue with me, well, that's the borders, and this is the shores. Your borders are also your shores. If you've secured your borders, you've secured your land borders and your shorelines. And if you read through this, if you actually read through this and pay attention to what President Trump says, instead of just focusing on up here, and then you just stop reading. Oh, the border's secured. I don't care about the details. He claims he has also dismantled all the foreign drug gangs that are taking the drugs into America and then distributing it and, poisoning the Americans. The Americans have no agency and no control over themselves, their bodies, their communities, or their borders. This is all foreigners. The foreigners are to blame, but President Trump has rounded them all up. So how is that true? And also the drugs are still coming into the country, still flooding into the country. And not just, apparently the drugs come off the boat and with their own, the boxes, the barrels, the containers, whatever they're in, they sprout legs and they just walk in on their own. They're also walking to American communities and then selling themselves to the American public. Somehow, it's just happening. Nobody stops and thinks about these things, because while a lot of people who support President Donald Trump like to imagine themselves as super patriots of the American Republic, they're just part of a personality cult. They just believe whatever they're told. They will defend President Trump and his administration just like Obama and Biden supporters will, no matter what they say or do, no matter how contradictory it is to anything they ever said while campaigning for office. So again, according to the White House's official website, since President Donald J. Trump took office, he and his administration have ushered in the most secure border in modern American history. And he didn't need legislation to do it. President Trump has made good on the promises he made on the campaign trail to usher in an unprecedented era of homeland security. And yet there's unprecedented amounts of illicit narcotics flooding into the country, so much so that the U.S. has to carry out extrajudicial executions in the middle of the ocean and also prepare the invasion of another country 1,000 miles away from U.S. borders. Doesn't add up, but Trump supporters they're not thinking about this. They're just listening and believing whatever they are told. They're not actually thinking about it themselves. And this is the problem with Western-style democracy. This is the mindset that it deliberately creates. In theory, this type of system is supposed to be an informed electorate voting in representatives that work for them. They tell these representatives what to do. They go to their local government, their state government, or the federal government, and they are supposed to work for the people. But in reality, it's exactly backwards. These people get into office, President Trump, President Biden, President Obama, President Bush, spanning this entire 21st century, and they tell the American people what to think. They will tell them what the agenda is. They will tell them, yes, I campaigned on no more endless wars, but this war is different. This isn't just another endless war sold to you on a false pretext. And the pretext is I secured the border, but drugs are still coming in over the borders, so we have to go to war with Venezuela. People are not thinking. And so everything is backwards, and this is why nothing ever changes. And yet, according to the same administration, Venezuela, so they secured the borders, unprecedented era of homeland security, and yet, according to the same administration, Venezuela is single-handedly circumventing this unprecedented era of homeland security to poison millions of Americans with illicit narcotics, so much so that it warrants a war of aggression launched against Venezuela itself, because that's what they're setting up. They're pretending that we're going to target the narco-terrorists, we're going to blow up some boats, but they're getting closer and closer to Venezuelan coasts. They're talking about striking targets within Venezuela itself, and they're just openly talking about removing the Venezuelan government from power. It's a regime change war. Take weapons of mass destruction and replace it with this myth that somehow Venezuela single-handedly is poisoning millions of Americans with little little motorboats with outboard motors that are traveling 1,000 miles from Venezuela to the US. That's what they expect you to believe. Let's continue, because I get into that too. Part of the theatrics is selling this latest war of aggression. It includes the US targeting boats allegedly trafficking illicit narcotics to the US from Venezuela, despite the boats being targeted not having the physical ability to make the over 1,000 mile or 1,700 kilometer trip. While some seem to assume the US had actionable information before carrying out the strikes, it should be pointed out that similar warfare all throughout the 20 plus years of the war on terror resulted in mainly civilian casualties. And we know that because it was exposed by a real American hero, Daniel Hale. He leaked information on US drone warfare. He was sentenced to jail. He was sent to go rot in jail for exposing US corruption, US crimes against humanity, war crimes. If you read through this entire article, he had information that revealed 90% of the people killed by US drone strikes were civilians, collateral damage, because it is impossible to find suspected criminals or suspected terrorists and just execute them extrajudicially using your drones. It's impossible to do that. You don't have the technology, you do not have the ability to do that. And the US doesn't even have the desire to do that. Much of what they are doing in these countries is simply degrading the country itself. They want to kill people, they want to destroy things, they want to degrade the country's ability to function as a sovereign nation. They want it to be weak, they want it to be divided, they want it to be in constant conflict. That is why they're doing it. So they don't actually really care who they're killing, as long as people are being killed, things are being destroyed, and the country never has a chance to stand back up on its 2 feet. So I talk about it. In a 2021 Washington Post article, it was reported that Daniel Hale, a former member of the US Armed Forces, leaked classified information about drone warfare to a reporter after leaving the military. The leaked information revealed, and this is a direct quote, during the 5-month stretch of an operation in Afghanistan, the documents revealed nearly 90% of the people killed were not the intended targets. So what makes you think anything has changed between then and now? What makes you think that? And people saying, well, of course they have to have evidence and information. They wouldn't just do this. They have been doing this throughout the entire 21st century. This is all they have done. There's no actual evidence that the US does it any other way. Trump administration has not provided any evidence regarding who these boats belong to, who's on them, what they're carrying, where they're going. They never explain how these little motorboats are going 1,000 miles from Venezuela to the United States. They're not explaining how many of these boats are making the trip and how this is what's flooding America with illicit narcotics, especially considering that at least the land borders are all airtight. No information has been provided. What makes anyone believe that the US is now suddenly telling the truth? They're still not going to show you any actual evidence, but this time they're telling the truth, especially considering all the other wars. The Trump administration, this administration, and its previous term in office, all of the lies that they have sold to the public to perpetuate constant American warfare around the globe. What makes you think this time it's different? It's not different. The same vague pretext and lack of transparency that resulted in staggering civilian casualties throughout the war on terror now continues amid the Trump administration's war on drugs. They're just changing a word, terror to drugs, and they're repackaging the exact same lies they've used to carry out endless war all throughout the 21st century. President Trump promised during campaign season to end these endless wars. Now he's repackaging all of the lies used to sell those endless wars to launch even more endless war. Launching a war of aggression based on false pretexts has defined US policy throughout the 21st century, is what I'm saying. Most notably ahead of the US invasion and occupation of Iraq in 2003. The Guardian, in a 2011 article, so they always end up admitting it, but when it's far too late to do anything about it. So 2011, after 1 million Iraqis have died, thousands of US troops have also died, tens of thousands injured mentally, physically, would admit that supposed justification for the invasion of Iraq was based on deliberate fabrications. This article here, let's just take a look at it. Defector admits to WMD lies that triggered Iraq war. Man codenamed Curveball invented tales of bioweapons. Iraqi told lies to try to bring down Saddam Hussein regime. Fabrications used by US as justification for invasion. And the Western media tries to make it out as if this man tricked the whole US government, military intelligence community into going into Iraq. They knew he was lying. They picked him out specifically to create a lie they could use as a basis for selling an otherwise illegal war of aggression. So they would admit it. The defector who convinced the White House that Iraq had a secret biological weapons program has admitted for the first time that he lied about the story, then watched in shock as it was used to justify the war, because he didn't convince the US. The US wanted a false pretext. He was offering one, and so they used it. While the article attempts to depict the US establishment as tricked, again, what I was just saying, into war with Iraq, it is clear that the war in Iraq, just like now with Venezuela, was already a foregone conclusion, and the US establishment simply worked its way backwards to create a narrative to convince as many Americans as possible and the world to go along. Under the current Trump administration, the very worst of past US conflicts is converging once again ahead of yet another unnecessary war of aggression, once again built on a transparently false pretext and waged by the Trump administration through the same indiscriminate brutality many Americans voted President Trump into office to end. And then these same Americans, not all of them, because a lot of them are extremely disappointed, disillusioned, angry at President Trump and his administration and all of the neocon warmongers he filled it up with, again, just like he did during his first term. But there are many more Americans, millions of them, who don't care what President Trump says or does. At least he's not the other guy or gal, the person that they have been made to hate and fear, so they'll accept anything else as an alternative, including President Trump doing exactly what all of these people feared 4 more years of Biden or Harris would have done if the election went that way. While some analysts have mistakenly concluded U.S. escalation toward Venezuela represents a retreat from Asia or even Eurasia and a transition from pursuing global primacy toward carving out an American sphere of influence, the U.S. is much more likely attempting to complement its continued encirclement, containment, and confrontation with both Russia and China by eliminating one of their more valuable allies, Venezuela, in a bid to escalate rather than withdraw from Washington's ongoing war against multipolarism. Venezuela is part of a U.S. global war on multipolarism. It's not a global war on terror. It's not a global war on drugs. It's a global war on multipolarism. It is a global war against national sovereignty versus American unipolar hegemony over all nations around the globe. That is what this is. That is what Venezuela serves to help advance. This is not the U.S. retreating in any shape, form, or way. And we have people like the Secretary of Defense, Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth, almost on a daily basis now saying, we're not retreating from Europe. We're not retreating from Asia. We want burden sharing, division of labor. And we need to focus on China, and we need to put a pin in the proxy war in Ukraine against Russia. Strategic sequencing. This isn't about withdrawing from our pursuit of global empire. This is about we're reaching the limits of what we can achieve. We need to do this in a more intelligent and sequential way. We don't have the ability to do it all at once. And we need all of our proxies to pay more and more and more to help us do this because we're incapable of doing it on our own. That is what's really going on, and that's what Venezuela is a part of. I said I was going to get into what has been going on most recently. This was just 6 hours ago. I'm recording this on November 14th, 2025. Trump briefed this week on options for military operations in Venezuela. I bet if you ask President Trump to point on a world map where Venezuela is, he probably couldn't find it, at least not initially. Maybe now he might because he's been briefed so many times on it, but I wouldn't be so sure. This is going to happen no matter what. It didn't matter if it was President Trump or if it was President Harris or if it was President Biden, just as it didn't matter who was in the White House or in Congress the last 25 years. The U.S. wants to overthrow the government in Venezuela. It does not want nations anywhere on earth including maybe especially in Latin America, having a independent foreign and domestic policy. They want these nations captured and to serve US interests. They do not want these nations deciding for themselves what type of future world they want to contribute to. Venezuela has openly, eagerly thrown in its support for a multipolar world. That was their crime against US empire. That is why they're being punished. That is why the US wants to overthrow the Venezuelan government. Just like we're listening to Trump supporters make excuses for why President Trump is meeting with the head of Al-Qaeda in Syria in the White House about how, well, now Syria is going to be a great US ally and it's going to fight all of our enemies in the region. Why are these enemies in the region enemies in the first place? Because they have their own independent foreign policy, have their own ideas about the region of the world they live in and what it should look like and how it should be run. And US does not accept that. So it destroys these countries. It installs client regimes into power that answer to Washington rather than to the people actually living in Syria, even if that proxy government is literally headed by an Al-Qaeda terrorist, a senior terrorist leader. Doesn't matter as long as they serve Washington. That is the common denominator. When you look at Ukraine, you look at Syria, you look at Iraq, when the US overthrew the government there. You even look at countries like Israel or the island province of Taiwan, the client regime the US installed into power in the Philippines, in South Korea, in Japan. That is the one thing they all have in common. They all pretend to be different flavors of political ideology, religious political ideology, different flavors of economic management. But in reality, the one thing they all have in common, and the only thing that actually matters, is they answer to Washington at the expense of the people living in the borders that they preside over. And now they want to transform Venezuela into a proxy, and again, to serve this overarching decades spanning policy of maintaining primacy over the entire planet and ensuring no rivals develop. Well, those rivals are developing, Russia and China, and the only hope the US has of encircling and containing them, if they cannot fight them directly, is by attacking and destroying all of their allies worldwide, including in the Western Hemisphere, including nations like Venezuela. If you thought this video was useful, please like and share. Think about subscribing. It's free to do. It helps the channel grow. Check the video description below for all the other places you can follow my work. All of my videos go up on YouTube, Rumble, X, and Telegram. In the video description below will be the link to the article that I read from and all of the sources I cited in that article. In the video description below will also be links to ways you can help support my work. I do not monetize any of my social media platforms. If ads pop up, feel free to skip them or block them. They're not helping me out at all, especially on Telegram. I do not know if ads show up on my Telegram channel, but if they do, don't click on them, especially these cryptocurrency pyramid schemes, unless you really want to. It's not helping me out at all. If you do want to help support my work, please do so through Buy Me a Coffee and also through Patreon. Again, the links will be in the video description below. To everyone who has been helping out, whether it's a one-time donation, donations month to month, if you have no resources to spare and you're just helping share my work with others, or you're clicking like, or you're subscribing, or you're posting a kind comment in the comment section, or you're sending me a news tip, all of that greatly helps. All of it is what makes this work possible. I am sincerely appreciative of all of it in whatever form. And as always, thank you for watching.